Howdy, my name's Max with Hutchinson Construction. I'm the logistics and supply manager here. Today we're going to be going over the Bomag BW284 vibration smooth drum. It's another piece of equipment we use on every single one of our projects. We got to get it to get compaction in our moisture control. We got to get compaction in green spaces. There's a lot of different spots that we just have to get compaction in, and this is the best way of doing it. Its operating weight is 28,423 pounds, but with the centrifugal force of there's a motor inside this big drum that spins. With it spinning in medium level, it's actually putting 34,643 pounds down onto the ground, making it where we're going to pass our compaction tests in our MC pad. It holds 75 gallons of fuel. It's a 12-volt system, and it can go a maximum speed of 10.1 miles per hour. Highly advised not going that fast, all right? This thing will throw you off. This one has a cab. A lot of them don't have cabs, and there's usually a lot of big risk with these things rolling over. So you got to be careful getting on inclines or going next to holes or trenches, because you don't want to roll off and get somebody hurt and cause an incident. The vibration frequency, it has two different vibrations on it. It'll vibrate at a frequency of 59.7 hertz on frequency 1 or vibe 1, and then on vibe 2 it'll vibrate at 66.7 hertz. The drum width on this one is 84 inch. That's what we normally use. It's 84.1 if you want to be technical, and its diameter around is 54.1 inches. We use this a lot. I mean, it's a workhorse as well. You know, in the summer you got to have the cabs, but there's a lot of information online again on these things. But if you have any questions, just please let us know down in the comments. We'll be happy to answer them. Thank you and have a great day.
Well, welcome everybody to the 6th episode of the Civil Matters podcast. Today we have David Kinchen, who's a National Construction Director for Burns McDonnell. So welcome, David.
Hey, appreciate being here, man. War Eagle.
War Eagle.
Got it on, repping the brand
Yeah,
today.
I see you're sporting
I'll be
there.
That's right, that's right.
So you went to, what's the name of the engineering school there?
Actually, I was building science.
You were building
construction science, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. 1988.
1988.
Been doing this for a minute or two.
Been doing it for a minute.
Yeah.
So what's your focus with Burns McDonnell right now? What markets are you in? So
now Burns McDonnell as a whole, large infrastructure, so water, wastewater, transportation, transmission, distribution, power, energy, oil and gas. We've got do a lot of data centers, social infrastructure type stuff. We're pretty diversified. My focus specifically is water and wastewater, and I'm responsible for our business nationally. So I grew up in the Southeast. Said I went to Auburn, but I'm Texan by the grace of God. So I've been here about 10 years, and but I travel nationally for the company, and we've got projects in East Coast, so Virginia and the Southeast. We've got work over in Denver, and then kind of everywhere in between. So I spend a lot of time on airplanes.
Have you always been in water, wastewater?
I would say the majority of my career. My first municipal water project was in 1996. I did an industrial project back in the early 90s. Right out of school, I went to work for the old Rust Engineering Company in Birmingham. And so we had some industrial water stuff that I worked on, but municipal started in 1996. I would say the majority of my career, I had a little bit of a stint in the federal space, a little bit in transportation. I worked for Balfour Beatty years ago. There's a little story behind that, but for the most part, have been in water and wastewater the majority of my career.
And what's kept you there? What's the draw?
Man, I love it. I did vertical work very early on in my career for a little bit. So a little bit of a story. Went to work for Rust, and we were doing pulp and paper, and they don't put pulp and paper facilities in really sexy places. I was getting ready to move to Muskogee, Oklahoma. There was a fiberboard recycling facility over there, and they wanted me to go over there. I was a project engineer, cost and scheduling. And I got a call from a buddy of mine over at Balfour Beatty and said, hey, we need somebody at your level, and I was still young in my career, it's interested in going to the U.S. Virgin Islands. Are you interested in doing that? I'm like, Muskogee, Oklahoma, U.S. Virgin Islands. I think that's a done deal. I did get a free interview and a trip down there out of it, but ultimately went down there and lived down there for 2 years. And we were rebuilding after Hurricane Hugo. So did primarily vertical stuff, rebuilding hospitals and schools, rebuilt a cruise ship here, but then went back to Atlanta after that and started working in municipal water and wastewater. And loved it. It was complex. It was an existing facility, 12 MGD expansion of an existing water plant. And at that point in time, Atlanta was booming. There was so much going on. And there was more work. There was a decade and a half of work in the water and wastewater space in Atlanta. So I fell in love with it. Fell in love with the challenge. It was a pretty tight-knit industry in Atlanta. So you kind of know all the same circles. And so it was fun. I enjoyed it and kind of really never left it.
Cool. Well, tell us about your family. When did they come into the picture?
So being from Auburn, I've got a construction casualty. So I had a wife right out of college, like 3 days after I graduated. I married an Auburn girl. We have a son together, but we were married for about 12 years. And then with all the travel, I was in California at the time with Balfour Beatty, and it just didn't work out. So, so I met my current wife. We've been married for almost 25 years. Met her on an airplane, traveling back from a project. And, so we've been married for 25 years. We lived in Atlanta. She actually is from Texas. So dragged her kicking and screaming to Atlanta for about 14 years. And then you marry a Texas girl, you always move into Texas. So here I am.
You kicking and screaming in Texas?
No, I got to be honest with you. I was happy to get out of Atlanta. We love Texas. Our youngest son, he was in the 5th grade when we moved over here, and it's just been a blessing for our family to be here. We have a good time. We're empty nesters now, which makes it even more fun. And man, Texas is a playground. It's a magical place, and we love it here. And in the industry and the growth, not too bad either. So,
what's some of your favorite things to do in Texas?
Man, we love the hill country. So we try to go down to Fredericksburg and the hill country as much as we can. I actually like San Antonio. Food down there is fantastic. So we go down to San Antonio. I spend a lot of time there on business. We actually got a project in San Marcos. It's one of the few municipal wastewater projects going design build. And so I'm down there on occasion, down in the San Marcos, New Braunfels area, which is where we're actually looking to move down there because we love the hill country. And then Big Bend National Park is fantastic. If you ever get a chance to go down to Terlingua in the desert down there, man, it's a fantastic spot. So
I do love the hill country though. I try to go a couple times a year.
Yeah, there's some pretty good places to hang out down there, right?
Yeah, it's a good time.
Yeah.
Well, besides that design build project, what else do you have working in Texas?
You know, we've got some industrial water, wastewater in Texas, and then the company as a whole. We're actually doing a design build transportation project for the city of Fort Worth right now. So, thinking about heavy civil construction work that we're doing. Like I said, we've got transmission, distribution, substations going all over the state because of what happened with Snowmageddon in 2020, 2021, and so our clients have doubled down, put their money where their mouth is in terms of hardening the grid, and so our company is heavily involved in that. I'm more peripheral to that and really focused on our heavy civil works and primarily water and wastewater. But man, our company is going like gangbusters in that space right now.
Well, can we talk about that just for a second? There's been a lot of talk with AI and data centers and the lack of power.
Yeah.
Do you have any insight from the Burns McDonnell lens on, what are the hurdles that you see? How long do you think that's going to take? Is there going to be a potential slowdown in these data center builds because they can't get power, or do you think they're going to be able to catch up?
It is the long pole in the tent. I would say there's 2 long poles in the tent for data centers, manufacturing in general. going to be power, right? And it's interesting, and in particular, I think about Bitcoin mining, and some of the largest Bitcoin mining facilities, which are basically data centers, are in the state of Texas. And they're in a cooperative with the power companies. They're helping to invest in putting those substations in place and getting on the grid. But during times of challenges like Snowmageddon, if we have an emergency situation like that, they will delegate some of that power that they've got quarantined. They'll dedicate that back to the grid. So there's some interesting cooperatives going on between private industry and the energy companies. It's interesting though, when you look at, my world being water and wastewater, the second longest pole in the tent is water and wastewater.
Sure.
And so that is where we've got some challenges because you don't have private utility companies. You've got public utilities, and there's certainly there's a we talked about it earlier. There's a pretty long timeline to get money deployed under the current legislation, and just kind of the way water and wastewater funding has always occurred. It just takes a long time to get into place. Some of these larger hyperscale centers are spending the money, or I think about some of the chip manufacturing facilities. They're putting the infrastructure in place. They're spending the money as part of their capital, and then flipping it over to the public utilities to manage over time. But for that, it would stymie the industrial growth in the state of Texas. So, and then you think about power. When you're producing energy, water is foundational to be able to produce energy. So, water touches all aspects of what we're seeing in growth, or it can stymie all aspects. You know what they say in Texas: whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting, right? So, water is going to continue to be a key component of the growth in Texas, and it'll help facilitate and keep up, or it'll end up being an impediment to the growth that we think we are going to have over the next 15
Where do you
to 20
place your
years.
bet?
So I've been pretty heavily involved in some of the legislation here in Texas, just trying to provide small communities with all the tools that they need. So talk about design build and other collaborative delivery models, but design build in particular, because when you look at all the growth is occurring in the small communities. We're not putting data centers in downtown Dallas, right? It's in the communities. If you look at the grade report, so ASCE puts out grade report for infrastructure, and it covers all things, roads and bridges and dams and ports, and water and wastewater are two of those. If you look at where we are now, and I'll get to where do I think we're going to be, but where we are now, if you look from 2021 to 2025, the ASCE grade report, 21 had drinking water to C and water and wastewater at a D. Sitting today in 2025, we're at a D minus and D plus on both fronts. So water, wastewater infrastructure has certainly fallen behind. One of the key elements of that is getting funding in place and then deploying that capital quicker, so that not only can we keep up with the growth, but we have aging infrastructure. I mean, we've got some water, wastewater plants that are really, really old. We've got water loss occurring in between, so pipelines and water loss to the tune of billions of gallons of water over the course of a year. The funding piece. So this last legislative session, Senate Bill 7, Senator Perry out of Lubbock did a great job of setting the state up financially. There's going to be $1 billion a year to fund through property taxes to fund a water fund over the next 20 years. So say over the next 20 years, we're going to have $20 billion invested just from the state. Well, for every dollar that's invested from the state, it leverages about 3 or 4x. So you're looking at, $60, $80 billion over the next 20 years that can be leveraged for water and wastewater infrastructure to tackle the things that we're talking about. So the funding piece goes away as a problem. Are we ever going to have enough money to do everything that we want to do? Absolutely not. $80 billion will go a long way. The challenge now is how do we deploy that capital? How do we get it in the ground so it's serving us,
Right.
serving the municipalities, serving the industries? If you look at water usage in the states, I'll say the states, but in Texas, the majority of the water usage is going towards industrial use of some shape, form, or fashion. The municipal side is a smaller proportion of the water usage. So industry wants water quicker, faster, because their revenue, right? They want to get their facilities in place. They need water. They need power. So if I'm placing my chips, I'm going to place it on a positive outcome over the next 5 to 10 years. I think we'll turn the corner with a proviso of this. If we find ways or we put legislation in place that allows municipalities, water authorities, water supply corporations to deploy capital quicker, getting it in the ground, and that goes to really design build.
And is 5-10 years, is that quick enough? I mean, it seems like on every corner there's a multi-billion-dollar data center development that's going to suck up a lot of energy and water.
Yeah.
In 5 years, are we going to have enough?
Probably not in 5 years, but we'll start making a dent in it. Yeah. I mean, if you look at the 20 to 30 year projection of water, I mean, the demand is this and the supply is this, right? The good thing about our state and the funding that Senator Perry and our leadership in the state put in place, it's really going to be in part dedicated to developing new water resources. And what we're talking about is innovation that's already in place, direct potable reuse for industrial purposes, advanced treatment for brackish water. I mean, we've got a lot of brackish water under the state, but it's got to be treated for use. It doesn't necessarily, for industrial use, doesn't need to be to potable water standards, but it's got to be clean enough to use from an industrial standpoint. I think crystal ball, looking out 20 or 30 years, I think we can do a good job of filling that gap. Will we ever be able to close it with the thirst that we have in Texas? Probably not. The fact that we're in the Southwest and we go through droughts doesn't help things. But having alternative water supplies, aquifer discharge, so aquifer discharge recharge, ASR is a key component of that. So, taking water, storing it in the ground for future use. I mean, the interesting thing about water, we have as much water as we're ever going to have in the world, right? There's no new water being produced. Everything is essentially recycled water. Mm-hmm. For us, the challenge is how quickly can we reduce the time from when the water goes in the ground or it's to the point where we can take it out, or we put it in the ground from using it to the time that we can take it out and reuse it. We've got to try to reduce that time duration. And there's technology in place. There's aquifer storage that's in place that we can recover. There's a lot of technology that's in place to help us reduce that timeline. We've just got to be able to put it in place sooner rather than later.
So you've, along this journey, you've spent some time working on legislation, trying to get some legislation passed to make things a bit easier, right?
Yeah.
And to push design build.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? Kind of start with the high level as to what the goal was.
Yeah.
And then, as you start kind of peeling back that legislative onion, what that maybe looked like. I'm curious, is it the swamp that we hear about, or did you have a different experience?
I'll start there, and then I'll peel back the onion a little bit about my interest in what we're dealing with. So obviously, swamp. I had preconceived notions, I'm not going to lie. And listen, I love Austin. It's a great place. I met my wife. She lived there. So I have fond memories and a fond place in my heart for Austin, but it's the state capital. And so you always think, it's a swampy place. I'll say this. I have been enamored with the process. I'll call it the sausage making. there are swamp creatures, and there are going to be swamp creatures everywhere that you go. But when you look at the individuals who are helping to make the sausage, the staffers, the chief of staff in each of the legislative offices, they are dedicated professionals, and they are working their tails off, in particular during legislative sessions, to move things along, to keep their bosses, the congressional members, in line with what's going on, helping to keep them in line with the priorities that they have for their particular initiatives. And then I would say this, from a legislative standpoint, the congressional members that we've met, they are hardworking public servants. 99% of them are down there with good intentions. They're wanting to make a change. There's a process that you have to follow, and it does make it a challenge, but they're down there fighting for their constituents. So from my perspective, I've been pleasantly surprised with the individuals. I mean, Texas is a people's state, and the relationships that we've just been able to experience by walking through the Capitol with our lobbyists and the conversations that we've been able to have, the people that are down there are really, really dedicated to making positive change. So I've been pleasantly surprised.
That's really encouraging to hear.
It is, and is it like that all the time? No. And like I said, there are swamp-like creatures that are running around down there, but for the most part, I am really encouraged by what I see down there. I know that people want to make a change. That being said, there's always politics in play,
Sure.
right? And so negotiating through those is certainly a challenge. I think about, we'll peel the onion back a little bit. So the current legislation, so it's Government Code 2269, Subchapter H, is specifically dedicated to civil works in the state of Texas. And it's enabling or disabling legislation, depending on which side of the coin that you're on, around public works projects. And in particular, my world is water and wastewater. And the challenge that we currently have is there's a population limit of 100,000 people. So if your service area or your population of your municipality is less than 100,000, you do not have all the tools in place to deploy for your project. So you can't use design build. You're limited to competitive seal proposals, design bid build, and you can do CM at risk. And CM at risk is certainly a good model if you want to bring all stakeholders. But in terms of really having a highly efficient deployment of capital, design build is a really important tool for these communities, and they can't use it right now. And so I look back at 2011 when the legislation, the current legislation that's in place now, was first put in place. I think it was signed into law in 2013, and it was a political negotiation to get it to what it is. But from my perspective, and I think generally speaking, practitioners in the state would say that the 100,000 population constraint is disabling legislation, and it's pretty arbitrary. Some of the conversations that we've had, and maybe some of the reasoning behind why that population constraint is in place, is at that point in time, it was believed that design build was maybe a little too new, and that our smaller communities weren't sophisticated enough. I'm from a small community. I live in one now. I would, not sophisticated enough as saying maybe they're not smart enough, but from my perspective, I would put our local leadership out of our small communities up against any of these major municipalities. They're very sophisticated, they're educated, they know what's going on, and they're certainly able to navigate the nuances of design build.
So what's the goal? Is to completely wipe it out or change the number? And if it's changed the number, what's the science behind that number?
Well, that's a slippery slope, right? You're going back to another arbitrary number, perhaps. I mean, the nirvana would be to eliminate the population constraint. Or there's some guardrails that can be put in place for the smaller communities, 100,000 or less. Are there some guardrails that could be put in place around procurement? Because I think that's one of the observations and one of the concerns is design build becomes a qualifications-based selection, which by its very nature it is. But in the state of Texas, when you're choosing professional services, you're choosing based on qualifications. Engineers do not compete for work based on price. It's not a component. And when you're doing, in particular, progressive design build, you're selecting your design builder based on qualifications, but there's a price component to it. But the price component includes engineering. So you kind of got a little bit of a circular argument here around the pricing component. There are best practices in place. DBA has best practices. So, design build done right, that really lines out what procurement should look like. The cool thing about the state of Texas, the design build procurement laws in place for those that can use it, they're somewhat prescriptive, but they're actually in pretty good shape. They actually do a good job of lining out what needs to happen, how you need to score and select your design builders. And so I would say we've got pretty good legislation that follows best practices for the most part. No legislation is perfect, but I think we've done a pretty good job there, but for that population constraint. So that's nirvana. Where do we land this next legislative session? I don't know. I think it'll be a negotiation, politics again. But it's something that I'm passionate about. I think it's worth fighting for. Given that I live in a small community, I know what's happening around the state in these small communities. They need to have all the tools in place to do what they need to do for their ratepayers and for their citizens.
Well, it sounds like, through DBIA or, state legislation, there's enough resources that they could manage just fine, right?
Yeah.
What percentage fall under that 100,000 cap versus how many are over that can actually use design build?
So,
do you know?
Yeah, it's interesting. So over, I would say from a population standpoint, about 55% of the population live in communities less than 100,000. But when you look at the number of water systems in cities that are below 100,000, it's over 90%. So 90% of our communities cannot use design build to do what they need to do. Now, it's interesting. It's just a carve out for heavy civil. Mm-hmm. If you look at fire stations, schools, hospitals, subchapter G in the legislation allows them to use design build for those facilities, just not water and wastewater. So there's a little bit of market protection, I think, that perhaps went into the original legislation. But what we've seen in other states, and it's interesting, I think that's one of the myths around design build, is that all the national companies are going to come in and gobble up all the work. But if you look at Florida as an example, and if anybody has been challenged with water and wastewater, it's been Florida. Mm-hmm. They opened up legislation years ago. They're really pretty much a design build state for the most part. And the smaller firms that were in place 20, 25 years ago, and I did some work down in Florida, those firms have actually grown tremendously because they were able to participate in projects that they would not normally be able to participate in. They found a spot doing design build, and they're really, really, really good at it. And so those firms have grown, and I can see the same thing happening here in Texas. Just have to embrace it and make it available to small communities, because a lot of the regional engineering firms serve our local communities. They're the trusted advisors, and we think that they play a very important role in design build, water and wastewater in general.
So is there still an old guard that's lobbying for self-preservation, fighting against this?
Yeah, there is. Okay. And we understand the who and the why, and we are doing everything that we can to reach across and sit at the table and have dialogue. I mean, that's so important in any issue that we're dealing with, right? We do have a problem. We need to jointly agree as to what the problem is. But if we could sit down and have those conversations, I think we could jointly come up with a solution that works for the broader population of Texas. I think it's just going to take some time and a willingness to sit down and talk.
That's awesome. So what's the outlook? How long do you think this runway goes?
For water?
Yeah.
Oh, it's as long as the growth keeps coming here.
I mean, with the legislation.
Oh, the legislation piece.
Yeah. You think it's as?
So, we started nibbling around the edges during the 2023 legislative period, and just we're behind the eight ball in gaining a broader coalition. Part of the challenge with getting a coalition that includes the smaller communities is education, right? A lot of the smaller communities, because they've never had it, mm-hmm. they don't know that it's a tool that they can use. So they're living with what they have. and they're doing the best that they can. But when you look at the money, when you look at what's going on in terms of the need, education is going to be key. So we started in late 2024 and into 2025, increasing education. So the DBIA Southwest, along with the Water Collaborative Delivery Association, so the WCDA, have been jointly putting on education sessions specifically dedicated to municipalities and some of the smaller communities around the state, just to get them educated as to what the tool is,
Right.
and helping them understand that, this is what you could do. You can't use it yet. What does that look like for you? And this is something that you're interested in. Over the next year, jointly, WCDA and DBA Southwest are going to be putting on monthly seminars for the next year. They're going to be webinars, essentially, but again, dedicated to educating the small communities as to what the tool is that's available to them should the legislation change. So we want to make sure that they understand. We actually had two draft bills or two bills that were put into committee in 2025. So jointly, again, DBA Southwest and WCDA were able to put forth bills. We had sponsors, Senator Sparks and Representative Kitzman with some co-sponsors forwarded those bills. They never were able to be heard in committee. There was a lot of political upheaval. They were calling it the Hot Mess Express down in Austin. Maybe a little swampy there, but it's another story. But we were able to get bills put forth in committee. Never were able to get the hearing in place. We're going to go probably through that same process again this year. We've got some different perspectives and different conversations that we're having. Again, the idea is to bring the industry to the table. Let's have a conversation about it and figure out what we can do to solve that problem, because we've got to deploy capital quicker to meet the demands that we're going to see over the next 15 or 20 years.
Now, do these communities work independently, or is there some sort of an association where there's sharing of knowledge and resources between them? Is there a conduit for that?
Yeah, there's, it's interesting. There are a lot of conduits. So you got AWWA in Texas Wheat here. So you've got those two organizations. A lot of the members are part of those organizations. And Texas Water is actually going to be in San Antonio this year. And it's the largest regional water conference in the country. And so there's a conduit there for education. As a matter of fact, we're going to have a session at the Texas Water Conference. We're going to have a panel. We'll have practitioners from the state. We'll have elected officials on the panel just to have this conversation. So that's going to be, I think, an eye-opening conversation for a lot of the members. It's interesting, the DBA National Specialty Conference, so water, wastewater, and transportation is going to be in Grapevine this year. Very timely. So there's going to be an opportunity for an education conduit there as well. And then you've got Texas Rural Water Association. There are a number of state organizations that our members are a part, our municipal members are a part of, and we're reaching into those organizations, making sure that we have an opportunity to spend time with them. And again, the idea is to help educate them. It's not about pushing design build on anyone. It's about making them aware that that's a tool that they should have in their toolbox.
Does that tool help with the deployment of capital?
Yeah, it absolutely does.
How so? How does that help?
So I can't use Texas as an example, unfortunately, but I can, the projects in Texas are pretty sizable. $100, $200 million is a run-of-the-mill water and wastewater project these days. We're just finishing one up just north of here in a different state. But for Progressive Design Build, they would not have been able to get the project shovel ready and begin deploying capital within the timeline that WIFIA had established. So this is, federal funding,
right,
coupled with SRF funding from the state. There are certain timelines and deadlines that if you don't get the project at least partially shovel ready, you can't access the money. As a matter of fact, it'll expire. But we were able to do that with Progressive Design Build, and over the length of the loan for this particular municipality, just the cost of money alone saved them $93 million over the life of the loan. So that's Aunt Bessie paying the water bill, and that $93,000 savings impacts the savings that she's going to have on her water bill. So instead of having 20 and 30% rate increases, they're looking at 4 to 6% rate increases over time. So that's real money to the people who were paying the bills. In addition to that, had that project have gone traditional delivery, so the project is within budget. It's about a $500 million project. Had they have gone traditional design bid build without the influence of constructability, value engineering, early procurement opportunities to bring the schedule to the left, it would have been probably a 7-year project instead of a 4 to 5 year project. That would have cost them probably another $200 million just in cost of time, inflation, and escalation. So if you look at the overall savings, pretty significant, and that impacts ratepayers. That impacts me and you when we're paying our water bills, right? So in terms of deploying capital quicker, it absolutely helps you deploy capital quicker. You're much more flexible in how you can deploy that capital. You can do it in tranches, so you can customize the delivery to meet the financial abilities of the municipality to pay. You can stretch it out a little bit longer. You can front end load it. There are a lot of different things you can do with that delivery model.
Well, it seems like a really key benefit to, the rational drowning of the situation with so some of these bigger players,
right?
The Googles and Amazons. You need this water for both power and your facility, and we have a cog in the wheel here, and this delivery method is going to help solve that for everybody.
Yeah.
So it seems
like
a smart way to go.
It is, and if you look at industry, when industry is doing site selection and they're looking at Texas and they're looking at other places to put their facilities, those are really they're not qualification processes. It's a disqualification process. One of the key things they look at is infrastructure. And if you have the infrastructure in place, or you have a plan to get it in place timely, so that when they deploy capital to begin building their facility, they need water, they need energy for startup and commissioning well in advance of when the process goes into place, which puts extra heat on the schedule for infrastructure. So we've got to have mechanisms in place to support those type of investments from private industry. Otherwise, we're going to be stymied, and they're going to go to other locations that have water, that have power, and aren't constrained by how they can deliver that infrastructure.
Real quick, because we're out of time, but I have one question.
That went quick, man.
One more question is, they've been talking, they as in the industry has been talking about, and the government pushing these large developments to build their own infrastructure for power. Is there a possibility to get around this issue to also push these developments to build their own treatment plants?
That's an interesting conversation. In distributed treatment plants solve a near-term need, but the challenge is over time. And God love developers; they do a great job of getting houses on the ground or getting commercial facilities in the ground. But in terms of water and wastewater, that's a cost to them. It's not a service. And so what we've seen around the country is where you've had developer-driven water and wastewater treatment plants where they basically own it. They don't put the money needed to maintain that for the long term. And then what happens over time is that municipalities come in and they tend to take those over. And what they take over is a very distressed asset that hasn't necessarily been maintained as it should be over time.
Yeah.
So then the community at large has to pay for that increased cost of upgrading that development or upgrading that water and wastewater facility so that it can continue to serve the development that it's always served. So it's a little bit of a slippery slope. Ideally, water and wastewater is done by the municipalities because these are long-term assets. We're talking about 40 and 50-year assets, not just something to get you over a hump for 10 or 15 years.
Sure. Makes sense. Well, I really appreciate your time coming in, talking
Man, I
to us.
enjoyed it. Yeah. Thank you.
It's been good and very enlightening. So thank you.
I appreciate your time. Thanks a lot, man.
Yes, sir.